you'll notice that across the shoulder of the teacher that there's actually some sentence frames in the classroom. And so when you first watch the video, you think, well, it'd be great if you had a student that said something like, I'd just like to build on, so-and-so's idea. But you think, how does that actually happen? Well, the way that happens is through explicit instruction. And so one of the things that teacher has done is explicitly taught the language of conversation. So you notice there's some sentence frames around things like, I agree with you because, I disagree with you because, I'm still wondering. So we want to think about, well, what's the language of the conversation that we'd want students to be having, and then making sure that we're explicitly teaching it, and possibly putting it into an anchor chart like this to say, okay, guys, when we're sitting down for this discussion, these are the sorts of things that I'd expect to hear you saying. Teacher modelling it, really encouraging the students to do it, giving them positive reinforcement when we're starting to use some of these sentence frames in the conversations that we're having as a whole class. So we've got those talk moves and we could think about trying it. We've got some sentence frames that we could think about developing with our student. And just one more strategy when we're thinking about whole class talk that I'd like you to consider is the work that Dylan William has undertaken. And I think he's got a really nice idea that's an easy implementation strategy to start to enact classroom discourse in your room.
So we've got to get away from this IRE, this initiation, response, evaluation. That's what researchers call what they see in classrooms. Teacher says something, initiation, student responds, response, teacher evaluates, IRE. I call it serial table tennis. What we need is more basketball. So I ask you a question, I'll ask you what you think of his answer, and I'll pick on you for an explanation. One teacher, she calls it pose, pause, pounce, bounce. Pose the question, pause, pounce on one student, and bounce that student's response to another student. And you can actually see her doing it. Pose, pause, and she actually got this little thing she says under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, got to wait a little more. Because she knows that's the only way she can slow herself down.
So just a nice simple strategy that we could be trying. So pose the question, pause, so exhibit that wait time. Pounce, which some people interpret as, it's cold call, but I suppose I'd go back and say, just think about AITS Standard 1, which is know your student. So really think about who that student is that you're pouncing on. You're not pouncing on a student for them to make a mistake. You're pouncing on a student so they can contribute to the discussion. And then once that student has contributed, then you bounce it to another student. So we've got some things in whole class teaching. We're knowing that reasoning is really important. We want students to be constructing viable arguments. We want them to be critiquing the reasoning of others. And so now we've got some strategies we can be trying in our early years classroom to enact these in a meaningful way. And so I want you to now think about what talk already looks like in your classroom or your school. So do you have any norms around talk? Just think about if someone walked around your school, what would they hear? Whose voices would dominate? And I suppose the really big thing that I'd get you to start thinking really carefully about, that if we think of dialogue as being a ball, being passed back and forth, who would hold the ball most of the time? And does the dialogue go from teacher to student to teacher to student to teacher to student? Or does the dialogue go from teacher to student to student to student and then back to the teacher? And so when we're thinking about talk moves, pose, pause, pounce, bounce, what we're really trying to do is get kids to go from teacher to student to student to student before it comes back to the teacher. So we want to try some of these strategies and see if we can generate some nice discussion. Like I was saying, some of the fundamental things that sit behind it are actually explicitly teaching talk. So it might be going through the language expectations, coming up with some sentence frames and some anchor charts around the type of things that you would expect to see.